We have been talking about this pendulum movement swinging from one side to the other, and that's one of the problems with our policies here that we continue talking about. But if the interests of both countries in the region are not convergent and they are more divergent, then how do we find any common ground? Especially in US-Pakistan relationship where there's a huge deficit.
Well, this is actually a question that a lot of people are asking in Washington now, particularly as the U.S. has moved increasingly closer to India over the last few years. And I think there's a view that's pretty clear, and I think it's quite accurate, that the U.S. Under the new administration is really going to focus on the India relationship, which could occur, which probably will occur, to the detriment of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. I don't know if I would go so far as to say that there are no shared interests at all between the U.S. and Pakistan. I agree it's hard to identify convergent interests, but there are some there, and one of them could be, for example, a Pakistan that does not suffer from the levels of terrorism that it has in recent years. Of course, the situation has stabilized for now, at least. I'd like to think that's a convergent interest right there. With Afghanistan, it's much more complicated, obviously. I would like to think, in an ideal world, that both the U.S. and Pakistan would want to have some type of scenario in Afghanistan where Afghanistan is a relatively stable place. Again, this is all very complicated, but I think that at this point you need to look for ways, transactional ways, that the United States and Pakistan can figure out ways to work together. And that could include some levels of, for instance, counterterrorism cooperation. I mean, clearly there's all kinds of disagreements, and we can get into this, about the Haqqani networks and the Lashkar-e-Taibas and those types of groups. But I'd like to think that there are ways that the two countries can work together to deal with, for example, AQIS, the Al-Qaeda, the South Asia affiliate of Al-Qaeda, and also the rising presence of ISIS, which I don't think is quite as strong as some may suggest it is in this part of the world. These are organizations that clearly threaten Pakistan, that threaten the region, and that threaten the United States. And also groups like the Pakistani Taliban, which are a shadow of their former selves, but they're still there. They're very powerful factions of that group, like Jamaat-ul-Ahrar. And the TTP is an organization that has tried to attack the United States. An individual a few years back had gotten training at a Pakistani Taliban camp and tried to blow up Times Square in New York. So you have to look to that. There also is continued economic cooperation, which doesn't get the media attention. People like to focus more on the security issues because that's where the tensions are. But not too long ago, the U.S. came out with a civilian assistance program, what here is probably referred to still as the infamous KLB, the Kerry Lugar-Berman legislation. The money expired in 2014, but there still is money there. Economic support continues. Certainly there could be cutbacks in aid in Washington, but at the end of the day, that continues. So I don't think we need to be thinking that it's time to essentially look elsewhere. This relationship is not going to come to an end, and I think that there's a view in Washington that it simply is better to have a relationship with Pakistan than not to have a relationship with it. There are plenty of people that think that's wrong, that it's time to simply give up on Pakistan, so to speak, and move elsewhere. But there's a sense that there are ways for the two countries to find ways to work together. But the important thing is to keep the expectations low and not to talk about strategic relationships, not to necessarily focus on strategic dialogues. Look at the areas where both countries can contribute something to each other. And for the Trump administration, which is not going to want to write any blank checks, it's not going to want to provide any aid without assurances that things will happen to the liking of the United States, it's going to need to be recalibrated. So I think that the important thing is to keep expectations low and not overall. I mean, the most important thing here to highlight is not to oversell the potential that this U.S.-Pakistan relationship can bring.